The silence in Mr. Julian Croft's house was different from the silence in my own apartment. My quiet was thin, the kind that let the sounds of the city bleed through, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of the late-night bus, the muffled arguments of my neighbors. It was a silence defined by what it failed to keep out. Here, the quiet was a presence. It was thick and heavy, woven from the scent of old books, beeswax, and the clean, cool smell of stone. It was a silence that held you, a foundation. For the first week, I walked through the rooms as if I were in a museum, afraid my own breathing was too loud, too disruptive for the curated peace. My life had become a series of careful calculations. Rent, utilities, the dwindling balance on my one credit card, the precise amount of freelance graphic design work I needed to secure each month just to stay afloat. It was an exhausting, brittle existence. When the opportunity to house sit for 2 months came up through a former client, it felt like a lottery win. The pay was more than generous. It was a rescue line. It meant 2 months without the crushing weight of rent, 2 months to catch up, to breathe, to maybe even feel like a person again instead of a walking spreadsheet of anxieties. I had only met Julian Croft twice. The first time was a brief, formal handshake at a gallery opening where some of my early work was on display. A lifetime ago, it felt. He had bought a small, abstract piece I'd priced far too low out of desperation. He hadn't haggled. He'd just looked at it with a quiet intensity, his gaze analytical but not cold, and then he'd nodded to the gallery owner. The second time was the day he handed me the keys. He was older than me, maybe by 20 years, with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples and fine lines around his eyes that spoke of focus, not fatigue. He was tall and moved with an unhurried grace that seemed to calm the very air around him. "The alarm code is on the notepad by the door," he had said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to settle in my chest. "The gardener comes on Tuesdays. The housekeeper on Fridays. They will let themselves in. Otherwise, the place is yours. Please, make yourself comfortable." His eyes, a deep, thoughtful gray, had met mine, and for a moment, I felt thoroughly seen. It wasn't an invasive look, but a comprehensive one, as if he were taking in not just my worn jacket and nervous posture, but the exhaustion I tried so hard to hide. He'd placed a hand briefly on my shoulder as he gestured towards the kitchen. "There's food in the fridge. Don't feel you need to replace everything. Just live in the space." The touch was nothing, a fleeting social gesture, but the warmth of it seeped through my thin sweater. It was a simple, grounding weight that I found myself replaying in my mind for days. A steady, solid presence. It was the kind of touch that said, "It's all right," and so I lived in his space. I worked at the massive oak desk in his study, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The chair was worn leather, shaped by the contours of his body over years of use. Sitting in it felt both presumptuous and deeply comforting. I ran my fingers over the spines of his books, history, architecture, poetry, volumes in languages I couldn't read. I learned the man through the objects he chose to keep around him. He was disciplined, orderly, but with a current of profound curiosity running just beneath the surface. The house itself was a testament to his character. It wasn't ostentatious, despite its size. It was built of stone and dark wood, nestled amongst old-growth trees on a hill overlooking our small town. Every window framed a view of the forest or the distant, hazy mountains. It was a fortress of tranquility, a place designed for quiet contemplation. I'd spend hours just sitting in the main living area, watching the light shift across the slate floor, feeling the deep, settled peace of the place seep into my bones. It was a quiet I was starting to crave, a quiet that was healing the frayed edges of my nerves. I found a small, framed photograph on a side table in the study, half hidden behind a stack of journals. It was of a rugged coastline, gray sea crashing against black rocks under a turbulent sky. It was the same peace of mind he had bought all those years ago. He had kept it, not just stored it away, but framed it and placed it in his most private space. My breath caught in my throat. I touched the cool glass, a strange, unidentifiable emotion swelling in my chest. It was a mix of pride, confusion, and a startling, sharp pang of yearning. It felt like a connection, a slender, invisible thread stretching from his quiet, established life to my chaotic one. For 3 weeks, I fell into a gentle rhythm. I worked in the mornings, my focus sharper and my creativity more fluid than it had been in years. In the afternoons, I explored the house and the surrounding grounds, tracing the stone pathways that wound through the woods. I cooked proper meals in his spacious, well-equipped kitchen, using fresh herbs from the garden. I was eating better, sleeping deeper. I was starting to feel the return of a version of myself I thought I had lost for good, a calmer, more grounded man. And I thought of him constantly. I wondered where he was on his travels. I pictured him in a bustling European city or a remote, quiet landscape. I wondered if he was lonely. The house felt so personal, so much an extension of one man, that it was hard to imagine him sharing it. It was a sanctuary built for one. I would find myself pausing, listening to the house settle, and almost expect to hear his footstep on the stairs, to smell the faint scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and something clean, like rain. My fascination was becoming a quiet obsession. I was careful not to pry, not to open drawers or read his journals. My respect for his privacy was absolute. But I observed. I noted the way he organized his desk, the specific blend of tea he kept in a ceramic canister, the single, perfect feather tucked into the band of an old hat on a hook by the door. These were the clues to the man, and I gathered them like treasures, assembling a portrait of him in my mind. He was a man of substance, of quiet intention, a man who bought a piece of art from a struggling young artist and remembered it. The fourth week began with a storm. The sky turned a bruised purple-gray, and a fierce wind tore through the trees, rattling the window panes. Rain came down in solid, driving sheets. The power flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging the house into a deep, velvety darkness. I wasn't afraid. The house felt too solid for that. I found the emergency candles and matches Julian had mentioned, their location written in his precise, clear hand on the notepad by the door. I lit a few candles in the living room, their small flames dancing and casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. The silence was even deeper now, punctuated only by the drumming of the rain on the roof and the howl of the wind. I curled up in a large armchair, one that faced the great stone fireplace, a blanket tucked around me. I felt strangely content, a small, safe point of light in the vast, stormy darkness. I must have drifted off, lulled by the rhythm of the storm. I was woken by a sound that didn't belong to the house or the weather. A key turning in the front door lock. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My mind raced through possibilities. The housekeeper, the gardener? No, it was Wednesday. They wouldn't be here. A burglar? My body went rigid with fear. I held my breath, listening, trying to melt into the shadows of the armchair. The heavy front door swung open with a low groan, letting in a gust of wind and rain that made the candle flames dance wildly. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the stormy gray light of the fading afternoon. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dripping wet. He shut the door, the click of the latch echoing in the sudden, profound silence. He stood there for a moment, his head bowed, water running from his hair onto the stone floor. Then he looked up, his eyes adjusting to the dim, flickering light. He saw me. I saw him. It was Julian. His face was pale, etched with a weariness that went deeper than travel fatigue. His gray eyes widened slightly in surprise, but there was no anger, no alarm. Just a quiet, assessing stillness. My own shock held me captive, my throat too tight to make a sound. We stared at each other across the candlelit space, the storm raging outside, and a different kind of storm building between us. He was the first to speak, his voice low and a little rough, but steady as ever. Leo, he said my name not as a question, but as a statement of fact. An acknowledgement. I finally found my voice, though it came out as a shaky whisper. Julian, you're home early. My mind was still struggling to catch up. He was supposed to be gone for another month. He took a step forward, shrugging off his wet coat and letting it fall to the floor in a heap. He didn't seem to care about the puddle forming around it. His focus was entirely on me. I am, he said simply. He ran a hand through his wet hair, pushing it back from his forehead. Things changed. I started to get up, my legs feeling unsteady. My first instinct was to apologize, to explain my presence in his chair, in his house, as if I were an intruder. My mind scrambled, thinking I had to pack, to leave immediately. I was halfway out of the chair, my knuckles white where I gripped the armrest. Don't run, The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a physical command. They stopped me cold. It wasn't an order, not really. It was a plea. I sank back into the chair, my heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He moved further into the room, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were approaching a startled animal. He stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable in the wavering light. "I'm sorry to alarm you," he said. "I should have called. I wasn't thinking clearly. It's your house," I managed to say, the words feeling inadequate. "You don't have to call." A small, tired smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, but it's your space for now. I gave you my word." He looked around the room, at the candles I had lit, at the blanket I had been wrapped in. His gaze softened. "It looks peaceful." The power was still out, and the house was growing colder. I could see him shiver slightly. "You're soaked," I said, a sudden rush of concern overriding my anxiety. "You should get into some dry clothes," he nodded, his eyes never leaving my face. In a minute, he seemed reluctant to break the strange, charged connection between us. The air was thick with unspoken things, with the surprise of his return and the weeks of my solitary thoughts of him. It felt like a scene from a dream, surreal and intensely real at the same time. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice gaining a little strength. "You said things changed." He finally looked away, his gaze drifting towards the dark fireplace. "The trip, it wasn't what I needed. The quiet I was looking for wasn't there." He paused, then looked back at me, and his expression was one of such profound vulnerability, it stole my breath. "I think it was here all along." My mind reeled. The implication in his words was terrifying and exhilarating. He was talking about the house, of course, the quiet of the house. But the way he was looking at me suggested something more, something deeper. I was part of that quiet he had come home to. The thought was too big, too audacious to hold on to. I'll get my things together," I stammered, the instinct to flee, to return to the safety of my own small, complicated life, rising again. "I can be out in an hour, Leo." His voice was firm this time, cutting through my panic. "I asked you not to run. I meant it. The agreement stands. You are here for 2 months. My early return does not change that. This house is big enough for 2 inch." He held my gaze, and I saw a silent promise in his eyes. A promise of safety. A promise that he would not push, would not demand anything of me. He was giving me the choice, but he was also asking me to stay. And in that moment, despite all my fear and uncertainty, I knew I wanted to. I wanted to see what this was, what it could be. I gave a small, jerky nod. "Okay," I whispered. Relief washed over his face, softening the tired lines around his eyes. "Good," he said softly. "Now, I believe you were right. I need to get out of these wet clothes before I catch a cold." He turned and walked towards the staircase, his steps sure and steady in the darkness, leaving me alone in the flickering candlelight, my world completely, irrevocably altered. The power remained off for the rest of the night. Julian returned downstairs a while later, dressed in a soft gray sweater and dark trousers. He had built a fire in the large stone fireplace, and the room was filled with its crackling warmth and the scent of burning cedar. He had 2 mugs in his hands, and he wordlessly handed one to me. It was the tea I had seen in his kitchen, a fragrant black tea with hints of bergamot and lavender. It was warm in my cold hands. We sat in silence for a long time, not in the armchairs, but on the thick rug before the fire, its light painting our faces in shifting shades of orange and gold. The silence was different now that he was here. It was no longer just the quiet of the house. It was a shared quiet, filled with his presence. It was a comfortable weight, not an empty space. I found myself relaxing, the tension slowly seeping out of my shoulders. "Thank you," he said eventually, his voice a low rumble that barely disturbed the air. I looked at him, confused. "For what?" "For staying," he replied, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "And for this," he gestured vaguely around the room, at the lit candles, the warm fire. "For making my house feel like a home." My heart did a slow, painful flip in my chest. "I was just trying to stay warm," I said, trying to deflect the intensity of his words with a touch of lightness. He turned his head and looked at me, a genuine, gentle smile finally reaching his eyes. "You did more than that." We held each other's gaze for a long moment, and the space between us felt electric. I could feel the pull of him, a soft, inexorable gravity. It was the same feeling I got from his house, a sense of stability, of deep-rooted peace that my own life so desperately lacked. We talked for hours that night, our voices low in the quiet room. He asked me about my work, and he listened, truly listened, as I spoke about my frustrations and my small triumphs. He didn't offer advice or pity, just a quiet, validating attention that made me feel more seen than I had in years. I, in turn, asked him about his travels, and he spoke of crowded cities and empty landscapes with a detached air, confirming my suspicion that he hadn't found what he was looking for. I realized, he said, staring into his mug, that I've spent years building this place, this life of perfect, controlled solitude. And I came to the conclusion, somewhere over the Atlantic, that I had mistaken solitude for peace. They aren't the same thing, he looked at me then. Having you here, hearing the quiet sounds of someone else living in this space, it felt more peaceful than any silence I've ever known. His confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest. It was a staggering vulnerability from a man I had perceived as completely self-contained. He was opening a door, inviting me into a part of himself he clearly kept hidden, and I felt a powerful, protective urge to step through it with care. The next few days established a new, delicate rhythm. The power returned the following morning, but the quiet intimacy that had been forged in the darkness remained. We moved around each other with a careful, considerate choreography. I would wake early and make coffee, leaving a mug for him on the counter. He would cook dinner in the evenings, simple, elegant meals that we ate at the large wooden table in the kitchen, the conversation easy and unforced. I continued my work in his study, but now, the space felt different. It was no longer just his room, it was a space we shared. Sometimes he would come in and work at the small reading table in the corner, the only sounds the soft tapping of my stylus on my tablet and the quiet rustle of the pages he turned. His presence was a comfort, a steady anchor in the room that helped me focus. I watched him constantly, cataloging the small details of his life. The way he held his coffee mug with both hands, as if to warm them. The slight frown of concentration that appeared between his brows when he was reading. The way his shoulders, which always seemed to carry a certain tension, would relax when he was listening to music. He was a man of quiet habits and deep currents, and I felt like I was slowly, carefully learning his language. One afternoon, I was struggling with a design concept, staring blankly at my screen, the frustration mounting. I must have made a sound of exasperation, because I looked up to see him standing in the doorway, a concerned look on his face. "Everything all right?" he asked. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Just a creative block. It feels like I'm trying to push a boulder uphill." He came into the room and stood behind my chair, looking over my shoulder at the screen. I was acutely aware of his closeness, the warmth radiating from his body, the faint, clean scent of his soap. My breath hitched. He was so close I could feel the soft fabric of his sweater brush against my shoulder. "This part here," he said, his voice low and close to my ear. He didn't touch me, but he pointed, his finger hovering just over the screen. "The lines are fighting each other. What if you soften this curve, let it echo the shape over here?" His suggestion was simple, but brilliant. It was the key I had been missing. It unlocked the entire design. I looked from the screen up to his face, my surprise and gratitude plain to see. That's perfect," I said, my voice a little breathless. "How did you see that?" He smiled, a real, warm smile that made the lines around his eyes crinkle. "I spent 30 years as an architect. I know a little something about competing lines." He straightened up, putting a little distance between us, though the charged energy of his proximity lingered. "Sometimes you just need another pair of eyes." His hand rested on my shoulder for a moment, a repeat of the gesture from the day he gave me the keys. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just a casual touch. It was a gesture of connection, of support. The weight of his hand was reassuring, his fingers long and warm against my shoulder blade. I wanted to lean into it, to close my eyes and just feel the steady strength of him. The touch lasted only a few seconds, but it imprinted itself on my skin, a warm, glowing spot I could feel for the rest of the day. That evening, a tension settled between us, thicker and more palpable than before. The small talk felt strained, the silences charged with unspoken questions. We were both hyper-aware of each other, of the small space we shared in the vastness of the house. The careful dance we had been doing was becoming more difficult to maintain. We kept brushing against each other in the kitchen, our hands touching as we both reached for the same utensil, our shoulders bumping as we passed in the hallway. Each touch was like a small electric shock, a reminder of the growing attraction that we were both refusing to name. After dinner, he was standing by the large window in the living room, looking out at the twilight settling over the trees. I was clearing the table, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Leo," he said, his back still to me. "Could you come here for a moment?" My heart started to pound. I dried my hands and walked slowly towards him, my footsteps seeming unnaturally loud on the stone floor. I stood beside him at the window, not too close, but close enough to feel the warmth of his body. We both looked out at the darkening landscape. "When I was designing this house," he began, his voice quiet and reflective, "I wanted every window to frame a specific view, a living painting. I thought that would be enough. Art, nature, a well-ordered life. I thought that was the recipe for contentment." He turned his head to look at me, his gray eyes serious and searching. I was wrong. I couldn't speak. I could only look back at him, my own feelings a tangled mess of hope and fear in my chest. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Your safety and your comfort in this house are my primary concern. I need you to know that. Nothing has to change. But I also feel that if I don't speak honestly, I will regret it for a very long time. This is it." The present tense floods my senses. My breath is lodged in my throat. The air is thick, heavy with the scent of pine from the cooling night air and the faint, warm smell of him. The world narrows to the space between us, to the intense, vulnerable look in his eyes. This is the moment the ground gives way. "I didn't come home for the house, Leo," he says, and his voice is raw with a truth he has clearly held back for a long time. "I came home for the possibility of you being in it. I found myself thinking about you, about the quiet, determined young man I met years ago, about the art you create. I couldn't stay away. Every defense I have ever built crumbles. The fear of our differences, our age, his wealth, my insecurity, it all melts away in the face of his stark, terrifying honesty. He is offering me the one thing I never thought I could have, a truth without conditions. I start, but my voice fails. I swallow hard and try again. "I thought about you too. All the time." The confession feels small and inadequate compared to his, but it's the truest thing I have ever said. "Being here, in your space, it felt like getting to know you. And I liked the man I was getting to know." A wave of profound relief washes over his face, a visible release of tension in his shoulders. He takes a small step closer, and the space between us shrinks to almost nothing. He raises a hand, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. He doesn't touch my face, not yet. His fingers just brush against the side of my neck, his thumb coming to rest gently on the frantic pulse point just below my jaw. His touch is hesitant, questioning. I lean into it. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but it's all the answer he needs. It's my consent, my surrender. His other hand comes up to cup my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone with an incredible tenderness. His eyes search mine, asking a final, silent question. I give him a small, shaky nod. He leans in and kisses me. It's not a kiss of passion, not of desperate need. It's a kiss of arrival. It's slow and soft and breathtakingly gentle. It tastes of tea and honesty and a quiet, profound relief. It feels like coming home. It feels right. My own hands, which had been clenched at my sides, come up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath my palms. When we finally break apart, we don't move away. He rests his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the cool air. I close my eyes, savoring the feeling of his closeness, the solid reality of him. The weight of his hands on my face is the most grounding thing I have ever felt. "Okay," he whispers, his voice thick with emotion. "Okay." I breathe back, a real, genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in what feels like forever. More than okay. The morning after was disorienting. I woke up in the guest room, the early light filtering through the linen curtains. For a moment, everything felt normal, a continuation of the quiet routine I had established. Then the memory of the previous night rushed back in. The confession, the tenderness, the earth-shattering rightness of that kiss. A hot flush of anxiety immediately followed the warmth of the memory. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What now? The clear, simple lines of our arrangement, house sitter and homeowner, had been irrevocably blurred. The power imbalance, which I had managed to ignore while lost in the moment, felt immense and terrifying in the stark light of day. He was Julian Croft, a man of wealth and status, a man who owned this beautiful, solid house. I was Leo, a man who was only here because he couldn't afford his own rent, a man with nothing to offer but his own complicated, messy self. The fear of being a temporary amusement, a diversion for a wealthy man who had grown bored of his solitude, was a cold, sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. I had allowed myself to be vulnerable, to hope. The potential for getting hurt felt catastrophic. My old instincts screamed at me to retreat, to build my walls back up, to pack my bags and run back to the familiar misery of my own life before he had the chance to break my heart. I forced myself out of bed, my movements stiff and uncertain. I dressed and made my way downstairs, my stomach in knots. The house was quiet. I found him in the kitchen, standing by the counter, nursing a mug of coffee and looking out the window at the morning mist clinging to the trees. He was already dressed, not in his usual casual sweaters, but in a crisp shirt and trousers, as if he were going to a meeting. The sight of him looking so composed, so much a part of his own world, only amplified my insecurity. He must have heard me, because he turned, a soft smile on his face. The smile faltered slightly when he saw my expression. His perceptive eyes immediately registered my anxiety. He put his mug down and gave me his full attention. "Good morning," he said, his voice gentle. "Morning," I replied, my voice tight. I couldn't meet his eyes. I busied myself with getting a mug from the cupboard, my hands fumbling slightly. He didn't press. He just waited, giving me space. The silence stretched, filled with my unspoken fears. Finally, he spoke again, his tone calm and measured. "Leo, look at me." I slowly raised my head and met his gaze. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear and steady. There was no dismissal in them, no regret. Only a quiet, unwavering concern. "Nothing that happened last night was a transaction," he said, as if he had read my mind. "And nothing about it obligates you to anything. I want to be very clear about that. Your independence, your agency, is not negotiable." His words were a balm on my raw nerves. He saw my fear, and instead of ignoring it or being offended by it, he was addressing it head-on, with respect. I struggled to articulate the knot of fear in my chest. We're from different worlds, Julian. This," I gestured around the beautiful kitchen, "is your reality. Mine is a tiny apartment and a constant worry about bills. I don't know how to navigate that." He nodded slowly, his expression serious. "I understand that, and I won't pretend those differences don't exist. They do. But they are context, Leo, not a cage. They don't have to define what we are to each other, unless we let them." He moved from behind the counter and came to stand in front of me. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a warm, solid thing. "I have a proposal," he said. "A practical one." I braced myself. "I admire your work," he said. "I have for years. You are a talented designer. My company is in the process of a major rebranding. We need a new visual identity, a new logo, a whole new suite of materials. It's a significant project. I was going to offer it to a large agency in the city." He paused. "I would rather offer the contract to you." My jaw dropped. This wasn't a small favor. This was a career-making project. "This is not charity," he said firmly, seeing the doubt flash across my face. "This would be a formal, legal contract. You would be paid the full market rate, the same as any agency. You would have full creative control. You would report to my marketing director, not to me. We would keep the personal and the professional entirely separate. It would give you financial stability, on your own terms, earned through your own talent. It would level the playing field, just a little." It was a breathtaking offer. It was an act of profound respect. He wasn't trying to give me money. He was giving me an opportunity to earn it, to stand on my own 2 feet, to meet him as an equal. He was using his resources not to control me, but to empower me. Tears pricked my eyes, and I blinked them back fiercely. "Why would you do that?" I asked, my voice thick. "Because I believe in your work," he said simply, "and because I believe in us. And I want to build whatever this is on a foundation of respect, not dependency." He finally reached out and placed a hand on my arm, his touch gentle and reassuring. "The choice is yours, of course. No pressure, I looked at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, at the quiet strength in his face, and the last of my fear dissolved, replaced by a wave of overwhelming gratitude and a deep, blossoming affection. This was real. He was real. Yes, I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time that morning. I'd like that very much. A week later, the contract was signed. My life had a new structure, a new purpose. I spent my days in the study, which now truly felt like my workspace, diving into the rebranding project with a passion and focus I hadn't felt in years. The work was challenging and fulfilling, and knowing that I was earning my own way, that my presence in this house was now underpinned by my own professional merit, settled the last of my anxieties about the power imbalance between us. Julian was meticulous about maintaining the professional boundary he had promised. During the day, he was Mr. Croft, a distant client whose company I was working for. He would check in briefly, ask if I needed anything, and then leave me to my work. But in the evenings, he was Julian. The boundary would dissolve, and we would fall back into the easy intimacy we had discovered. We cooked together, we talked, we sat by the fire, and read in comfortable silence. One evening, we were sitting on the wide stone porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. I was leaning against him, my head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around me. It was a simple, domestic moment, but it felt profound. It felt like permanence. "Are you happy, Leo?" he asked quietly, his voice a low vibration against my ear. I thought about it for a moment. I thought about my cramped apartment, my old life of constant anxiety, the pervasive loneliness that had been my constant companion. And I thought about this, the solid warmth of him beside me, the quiet beauty of the evening, the fulfilling work that awaited me tomorrow, the sense of peace that had settled deep in my soul. "Yes," I said, my voice full of a certainty that surprised even me. "I am. Happier than I ever thought I could be." He tightened his arm around me, pulling me closer. "Good," he murmured into my hair. "Because I am, too." The test of our new reality came unexpectedly. A local arts foundation was hosting its annual fundraising gala, and Julian's company was a major sponsor. He was expected to attend, and he asked me to go with him, not as his employee, but as his date. The thought sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Going public felt like a huge step. Our quiet, private world was safe. The outside world, with its judgments and its gossip, was not. Our small town was not known for its open-mindedness, and the sight of Julian Croft, one of its most prominent and private citizens, with a man 20 years his junior, would certainly cause a stir. "We don't have to," he said, sensing my hesitation. "We can just stay here. I can make an excuse." I looked at him, at the quiet understanding in his eyes. He was, as always, giving me an out. But I was tired of running. I was tired of living a small, fearful life. The man beside me had shown me nothing but respect and care. He deserved to be stood beside, proudly. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I want to go with you." The night of the gala, I was a nervous wreck. Julian had arranged for a suit to be tailored for me, a beautiful dark charcoal wool that fit perfectly. But as I stood in front of the mirror, I felt like an imposter, a boy playing dress-up in a rich man's world. Julian came and stood behind me, his reflection meeting mine in the mirror. He was devastatingly handsome in a classic black tuxedo. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his gaze steady and reassuring in the reflection. "You look perfect," he said softly. "You look like you." "I feel like everyone is going to be staring," I confessed, my voice low. "They probably will," he said, his honesty surprisingly comforting. "Let them. The only person whose opinion matters to me tonight is standing right here." He leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to the side of my neck. "We'll face them together," and we did. Walking into that crowded, glittering ballroom with his hand resting lightly on the small of my back was one of the most terrifying and liberating moments of my life. Heads did turn. I could feel the weight of 100 gazes, hear the whispers. But Julian was a calm, solid presence beside me. He never left my side, introducing me to his colleagues and acquaintances simply as Leo, his tone leaving no room for questions or misinterpretation. He included me in conversations, his hand always finding its way back to me, a constant, grounding touch. Halfway through the evening, a woman I recognized as a notorious town gossip approached us, her smile sharp and predatory. "Julian, Darling, she cooed. I didn't realize you were a patron of the arts in such a personal capacity. Her eyes flicked dismissively over me. I felt myself tense, my old insecurities flaring. But before I could even react, Julian stepped slightly in front of me, a subtle, protective gesture. His smile was polite, but his eyes were ice. Martha, he said, his voice dangerously smooth. Leo is my partner. His talent is the reason I started paying attention to the arts in the first place. You of all people should appreciate the power of real inspiration. The woman's smile faltered. She had been elegantly and utterly dismissed. She mumbled a hasty excuse and retreated. Julian turned back to me, his expression softening. Are you all right? I looked at him, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. He had not just defended me. He had honored me. He had called me his partner. He had credited me with his own passion. In that moment, in that crowded, judgmental room, I had never felt safer or more cherished. I'm more than all right, I said, my voice full of emotion. I reached out and took his hand, lacing my fingers through his, a public declaration of my own. I'm with you. We left the gala early, slipping out a side door and into the cool night air. We didn't speak on the drive home. We didn't need to. The comfortable silence in the car was filled with a new level of understanding, a new depth of connection. We had faced the world together and had come out stronger. When we got back to the house, he turned to me in the soft glow of the porch light. Thank you for tonight, he said. Thank you, I replied. For everything. And then I was the one who initiated the kiss. It was different from our first one. It was deeper, more confident, filled with all the gratitude and love and fierce pride I felt for this incredible man. It was a kiss that sealed a promise of a future together. The next morning, I woke up not in the guest room, but in his bed, with his arms slung possessively over my waist and the morning light streaming in through the large windows. I turned in his arms to watch him sleep. In repose, his face was softer, the lines of stress and responsibility smoothed away. He looked peaceful. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the desperation that had led me to this house-sitting job, the quiet observation, the startling return, the slow, careful dance of getting to know one another. It hadn't been a whirlwind romance. It had been a slow, deliberate construction of something solid, something real. Like his house, it had been built on a strong foundation. A foundation of mutual respect, honesty, and a quiet, steady care. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. A slow, warm smile spread across his face when he saw me. Good morning, he murmured, his voice husky with sleep. Good morning, I whispered back, leaning in to kiss him. Later, we were in the kitchen, making breakfast together in a comfortable, practiced rhythm. The space no longer felt like just his, it felt like ours. My favorite coffee mug was next to his. My sketchbook was on the counter. Small pieces of my life had woven themselves into the fabric of his. I was thinking, he said, as he expertly flipped a pancake. The house-sitting agreement is officially over next week. My heart gave a little lurch of anxiety, an old, reflexive fear. He must have seen it in my face, because he put the spatula down and turned to me, taking both of my hands in his. That was a ridiculous thing to say. Let me rephrase. Your contract as my house-sitter is ending. But I was hoping you would consider a new arrangement. He looked at me, his gray eyes full of a hopeful, vulnerable light. I was hoping you would consider staying. Not as a guest, not as a house-sitter, as my partner. I was hoping you would consider making this your home. The final wall around my heart didn't just crumble, it turned to dust and blew away. This was it. The quiet, practical, and deeply romantic beginning I had never even dared to dream of. It wasn't a grand declaration in a crowded room, but a simple, honest question over a skillet of pancakes. And it was perfect. I looked around the sun-drenched kitchen, at the man holding my hands, at the life we had started to build in this quiet, peaceful house. The difference in our ages, in our bank accounts, it all seemed so irrelevant now. It was just context. The reality was the man in front of me, the respect he showed me, the love that had grown so steadily between us. The reality was that here, with him, I was finally, truly home. Yes, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears of joy. Yes, Julian. I'd love that. His smile was radiant. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest. I buried my face in his shoulder, breathing in his familiar, comforting scent. I felt the steady beat of his heart against my cheek, a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to my new life. It was a life I was no longer afraid of, a future I was ready to build, together, one quiet, beautiful day at a time. The silence of the house wasn't empty anymore. It was full of us. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.